everyone, this is Shayar from the Society for AI Literacy, and we're here today with a special guest, Dr. Sarah Eaton from the University of Calgary's Workland School of Education. She's a very prominent figure in the field of AI and education, and as you know, AI is definitely set to change how education is going to look like in the future. So we're very excited to have her on as a guest and kind of gain some insight into what the future of these two fields is going to look like. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Sarah Eaton. So really quickly, if you could maybe tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up even getting into this field of education and AI.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to join you today. It's a real privilege to be able to talk about two of my favorite topics together, artificial intelligence and academic integrity. In terms of my background, I was trained in literature and then came to education, so I'm an unexpected newcomer to artificial intelligence. I began to pay attention to the signals about how artificial intelligence would impact plagiarism in particular around 2019-2020 with GPT-2. That was a couple of years before ChatGPT came out, and already there were signals that this technology was going to change everything in education, starting with writing, but then we didn't know where things would take us. Since then, my whole area of research and my focus around advocacy and the student experience has become almost exclusively focused on generative AI.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing your background with us. So kind of the format of this will be, we'll ask some questions initially, have a conversation, and then we'll get into some questions that our viewers had, things that they wanted to learn, things that they were wondering about regarding this field. And then, as always, the full interview will be available on our website for anyone who wants to check it out. So I'll get into our first question that we had. One of the concerns that seems to be echoed by a lot of students right now is the fact that they're wondering, how relevant is the stuff that I'm really learning in school right now? Is it going to be useful down the line in an AI-dominated world? Or is what we're learning not really relevant for the future? So a lot of students are wondering this, and I was curious if you had any insight into this topic or maybe something that you'd share for those students.
This is an excellent question. And I feel like every time we have the chance to learn a new technology, it gives us insights into how we can learn in new ways and also bring value to employers. So I can give you an example from my generation. For example, calculators came in when I was in junior high. And there was a lot of worry about how and if calculators would be used by us later in life, would it be something that we would use on the job? And I recall one person saying to me that their teacher said, it's not like you're going to be able to walk around with a calculator in your pocket all the time. Once cell phones came on the scene, we all had a calculator in our pocket. But back when I was in junior high, no one could imagine that future. So today, when we're thinking about artificial intelligence now, we can't necessarily imagine or predict what the future will bring in 10 or 15 or 20 years. But we know that every time we practice with a new technology, we're building new skills that we can then transfer to whatever new technologies come forward that maybe we can't predict yet. So maybe it's not about ChatGPT, which some people say is extinct. Other people haven't tried it. But it's about becoming familiar with the technology and not afraid of it, so that by the time the next generation of tech comes out, we're not afraid of that either.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting insight. I guess to go a bit further into that topic, so for a lot of students, AI can write better than them. It can maybe come up with more interesting ideas than what they can come up with on their own. So in order to use this technology in an effective way and do it with best practices, what do you think would be maybe the skills that students should focus on for the future? Like, what would be the most relevant skills to build right now that would be translatable to an AI-dominated future?
This is a great question. And for me, in my work, I think one of the skills that we can cultivate in students of all ages is critical thinking. And also understanding that generative AI outputs are not all good and they're not all bad. So there's concepts around like digital citizenship that have been around for a long time for, say, children in K-12, right? We teach kids in K-12 that not everybody on the internet is your friend. And that kids in high school and university, we teach them that not everything you read in Wikipedia or on the internet is the truth. And so understanding what's real news, what's fake news, what's something you can rely on, what's fabricated, these are skills around digital literacy that we can just think about extending now. So I think some of the key skills for students today are critical thinking, digital literacy, and also being able to question what's real and what's not. That will become even more important in the years to come, I think.
Yeah, that was definitely really insightful. So let's be digital literacy, citizenship, and then what was the third one?
Being able to tell what's real and what's not.
Yeah, being able to tell what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
Okay. Those three things would be important. I think another thing too that's very interesting, and I don't know, I think others maybe find themselves doing this as well, but it's something I call GPT brain. It's like whenever you are given an assignment or you're given a challenge, oftentimes now the first instinct is just to go to GPT, maybe do a brain dump, and then come up with ideas there. And I'm questioning, perhaps, do you think that will enhance our critical thinking skills down the line, or do you think maybe it will erode them?
I'm not sure we can accurately answer that question yet. And I think part of it is that we haven't yet settled on like what are the outputs of these and how do we interact with them. I feel like we're in a really exciting and also a little scary experimental stage with this technology, and it might even out over time. I do the same thing as you, right? Like I get an idea for a project or an article and I almost use ChatGPT or Claude or some of these other apps as like a way to almost like bounce ideas off, or I'll have it generate maybe the beginnings of an outline. I'm like, no, I don't like this. I don't like this. It got this wrong. But that process of me thinking through what did I like, what did I not like, what did it get right, what did it get wrong, is like the critical thinking piece that we were talking about before, right? So it's not that I trust everything that it gave me as an output, but that I can sort of use it almost like a starter. Or another analogy I've used is sometimes an AI can be like my sous chef in the kitchen. In the end, I'm the one that's creating my dishes that I want my family to eat, but it can somehow like do some of the prep work for me, but in the end, I get to decide if it's good quality or not.
Yeah, that's very fair. And I think personally, I've almost started to see AI as an extension of my brain, in the sense that if there's some thoughts that are rough or unfinished, I can almost put it into this other part, this artificial brain, and then get that to process it and come up with something refined that I can then work with in my own brain and work on further. It's kind of like that sous chef analogy.
Right? And it's in my work on plagiarism, it's not like some people talk about plagiarism in really black and white ways, right? Like if you copy and paste from this source, then that's plagiarism and that's a bad thing. But I like to think about this idea of us co-creating writing or outputs together with an AI, right? And so this human AI hybrid output or thing that we get at the end is kind of exciting, but in the end, like we're the ones as humans that are responsible for that output. So I don't say to an AI, or I wouldn't say to a student, look, you've used ChatGPT for this, but who's the thinking done by in the end? I want to know that my students are the ones doing the thinking behind it. But this idea of like using an AI as kind of a buddy or a partner to help us co-create, I think is kind of an exciting idea, but also a little scary for some people.
Yeah, and then similarly, in that vein, I think we often think about humans training AI. We put input into AI and then get an output based on whatever we trained it with, based on those parameters. But one thing I've also wondered about, do you think perhaps we could look at AI's chain of thought, the way it approaches problems, and maybe build on that, on our own critical thinking?
It's possible, right? And the technology is evolving all the time. So for example, last week, I think I was playing with Notebook LM from Google for the first time, right? And they'd had it in the States for a while. I was eager to get my hands on it, and I thought, wow, this is a game changer, that I can upload an article or a bunch of articles, and it can do the summary, it can create the podcast, and all of those different aspects of it. But that wasn't available a month ago. So what's going to be available next year and the year after, and this idea of like human thought ending and AI thought starting, and what does that look like, and will AI start feeding itself its own data, are really important questions. I'm not sure we have the answers to yet, but certainly things to pay attention to and keep on our radar.
Yeah, and that Notebook LM podcast, it reminds me of what you said earlier about what's real and what's not. Because those podcasts are really human-like. the way that they talk, it's super natural, and I'm very curious on what implications that will have on being able to tell what's real and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I tried it with a bunch of different things, right? I'm sure you've done the same thing. And I would say by about podcast number 5, I was totally sick of those AI voices. It sounded so artificial to me, and I was like, okay, enough of this already. Like, I wanted to listen to real humans. So I wonder at what point users will reach a fatigue level where they want something more interactive, or just more human behind it.
Yeah, perhaps if they added different voices, but I think what's really interesting is just the way that they captured natural speech, because usually the AI doesn't make any mistakes, it doesn't pause at the right parts, it doesn't use filler words, but then the Notebook LM podcast is doing that.
It had all of that. The first time I heard one, I thought they sounded like they were trained broadcasters.
Yeah, that's what I got as well. It is the same voices, but if you kind of look past that, it's really impressive for sure. So I'll just check the next question. Kind of going further, one of the most interesting things with AI is how efficient it is. Because let's say, maybe it's not as good of a writer as Shakespeare, maybe it can't make poems as good as Edgar Allan Poe, but what AI can do is it can write very quickly and it can write a lot. It's super efficient. So maybe if it's lacking in quality, perhaps it makes up for that in quantity. In terms of that efficiency, I think one of the biggest bottlenecks in education is almost the grading. Students, they want to get feedback on their assignments, they want to know how to improve, but with a human there, they almost get stuck. Like, they have to wait for that feedback, they write an essay, they have to get the grading in to see where they can improve. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts, or maybe the broader thoughts of the scientific community on this idea of using AI for assessment, and maybe making the process more efficient and possibly even more fair?
I think the jury's out on assessment in terms of providing summative versus formative feedback. For example, the AI might be able to give some formative feedback in terms of how to improve along the process. Right now, the summative assessment, there's an important human component there because AI doesn't know the student, right? So when I work with my students around assessment, I want to see their drafts in progress. I want to be able to talk to them. I want to know that they're growing, not only intellectually, but also as a person. And right now, AI can't come in and weigh in on how are you developing as a human being. As an educator, that matters a lot to me. And I'm not willing to give that over to an AI yet. But if you're up late at night and you need some feedback on your writing, I'm not going to be there to answer your email at 2 a.m. So you might bounce some ideas off an AI. But at the end, I'm going to take all of your progress as a student into consideration when I provide the summative feedback. So right now I think that there are limitations to AI providing grading or summative feedback if we're doing education right. And when I say that, what I mean is taking the whole person into account.
Yeah, and I think tying back to that as well, and kind of an extension of that point, a lot of students, they are maybe good at some types of assessment, but perhaps they struggle with other types of assessment. So tests, typically some students have test anxiety. They maybe don't perform, or they don't display their full understanding of the material as they have it on the test. So do you think perhaps AI could step in there as a means of assessment, maybe having a conversation with a chatbot which goes over a topic, tries to cover all of the content of that topic, and then get a more accurate assessment of the student's knowledge?
Maybe as a diagnostic tool, that's one possibility for education in terms of where a student's at. I think an exciting possibility to kind of pull on that thread you were talking about is the way that AI might be able to provide support to students who are struggling. So for example, you talked about students who have test anxiety. And that's one possibility. I also have worked with lots of students over the years that have different levels of abilities with different subjects, right? So not all of my students are great writers. I love writing, but I was a lousy student in math and science. But if I had had access to ChatGPT, maybe I would have excelled a little bit more. Like, I grew up under the poverty line. We couldn't afford a tutor. So unlike wealthy students who went to a different school whose parents could afford a tutor, I just struggled. And as a result, I didn't end up getting great grades in math or science. It worked out okay in the end because I got a job as a professor. But when I think about students who might be like me that struggled in a particular subject area, I wonder about and I'm excited by the possibility that AI can be a tutor for those kind of students or provide support that maybe they otherwise couldn't afford. So I feel like in some ways AI could help to democratize education and also help as a bit of an equity catalyst for students who might be struggling in certain ways. So there's real promise there for AI that can help students if they're struggling.